It's drizzling and cloudy outside, but I can still see birds coming in and out of my window, and I can hear them chirping. How nice of them that they don't have to worry about anything. And I trust that even this morning you were able to have a brief moment with God and have a meaningful time with Him. Indeed, He cares about us and He knows what is happening. For this week, our first session would be the exegetical process. So, exegetical process, we have seen this briefly in session 2, and we have seen the outlines of Dr. Alan Ross, Douglas Stewart, Dr. Tim Walton, and Prof. Glenn. We have seen what is common among them. In any case, these are sample processes of doing exegesis. We will not cover that basically, but I'd like for us to look into the proposed format for the exegetical paper on a psalm. This is our focus at this time. You should have your notes with you, and as we go along through the session, I will ask you to read some of the sections so that it will not become boring if it's only me talking. Okay, so for the format, your paper should include an introduction, the historical background of your psalm, form criticism, translation, exegetical idea and outline, the exegesis proper, your theological synthesis, application, and interaction with secondary sources. Interaction with secondary sources is something that I really included here because I want you to continue to do research and be at home with it. So let's look at the details now. For your introduction, introduce the psalm that you are studying, who is the author, what issues or questions are being addressed by the psalm, if any, what is the value of this psalm to your reader. So, what would attract your reader or your audience to listen to you as you present the psalm? You also have your historical background. How would you like to read that, please? So additional question here would be, what can I know about the original audience, the original readers of the psalm? Background that can inform my study of the text. Include your form criticism, your structure, genre, setting, and intention. Gerstenberger will be helpful here. Engage in the discussion of your psalm with him. Identify the structure, genre, sociological setting, or Sitzem-Leben, which is not equal to the historical setting, and intention referring to the purpose of the story, which, according to form critics, is not the same as the purpose of the author in writing the psalm. So you must take note that Sitzem-Leben, according to form critics, is not the same as the historical setting as we know. And then intention for form critics is not the same as the purpose of the author in writing the psalm. Include also a translation. Would you like to read that, please? I'd like to make note of the figure of speech. When you're doing your translation, I mentioned to you before in Hebrew 2 that you can put your figure of speech in the footnote, but you put the meaning when you are translating the text, in the text, include it in the text. Let's look at the exegetical idea and outline. Exegetical outline. Out of the structure that you have observed from form criticism, create an exegetical outline that reflects the contents, the major points of the text, the logical arrangement of the writer's thoughts. Each statement must be unique to the verse covered. Figures of speech should have been interpreted so that the meaning of the figure of speech is the one that is reflected on the outline. Again, the figures of speech should have been interpreted here already. So put the meaning in the exegetical outline and the figures of speech itself in your footnote. The exegetical idea. This is one statement that has the subject and complement, summarizing the major points of the outline and message of the psalm. Let's look now at the exegesis proper. It would include again an introduction, because this time you will introduce the psalm here by giving a brief overview in narrative form of what the psalm is all about. Explain why you divided or outlined the psalm as you did. You have to validate or prove it. Is there a break in the passage? Is there a selah? Is there a change in subject matter? In this exegesis proper also, you'll have your body, your major points and subpoints. As you put together the result of your analysis of the text, follow your exegetical outline. This should be in complete sentences, presenting main and subordinate clauses. Give attention to textual analysis, grammatical and syntactical analysis, lexical analysis, among others. So basically, you are putting all together, although following an outline, what you have studied, the results of your study. For this class, you have to work on 2 textual issues and 1 full word study. Include your conclusions on this to your exegetical paper when you come to the verses related to this. So when you, for instance, if your word study is in verse 6, then when you get to verse 6, that's where you discuss your word study. Do not discuss it in verse 2 because your word is not in verse 2. The same way, if your textual issue that you considered is in verse 10, then deal with that issue in verse 10. For every major point, present your findings, grammatical, syntactical, lexical parallelisms in meaning conveyed, figures of speech in meaning. Present the message of the text under consideration. Transition to the next point. I'll explain that later. And your third would be your conclusion. This is your overall summary and message of the psalm. After you have done analysis of all the major points, summarize the message of the whole psalm before you get to the theological analysis. So, under your exegesis proper, you have your introduction there. So you explain a little of what the psalm is all about, what it's talking about, and then how do you divided the psalm. And then on your first major point, so say this is your first major point, say 1, 2, 3, for instance, you write down your observations, your analysis. That would include your lexical, grammatical, syntactical. If there's a textual issue, then you put them all here together. And then after that, you come up with a meaning and message of this point. Point 1. What is the meaning of point 1? And then you transition. And then you go to point 2. Do the same as you have done on point 2. And then transition and then go to point 3. Do the same as you have done under major point 1. And you come up with your conclusion. So for after doing all this analysis here, what is your summary? What is your conclusion for the psalm? So give your summary of the psalm in here before you go into the theological analysis. So that's for your exegesis proper. After your exegesis proper, you go into your theological synthesis. We will discuss this later in detail, but for this section, these are things that I'll be looking for. Letter A, discuss the biblical theology of the psalm. What does this particular psalm say about God in his dealings with humanity? Is the psalm, part or whole, quoted or alluded to in other Old Testament books? Is it used in the New Testament? Letter C, are there concepts in this psalm that relate to the classical doctrines of God, humanity, angels, salvation, sin, etc.? Letter D, what contribution does your psalm have in understanding a biblical or doctrinal concept better? Application comes immediately. Howard Hendricks, professor at Dallas Theological Seminary, said, observation plus interpretation less application is abortion. So observation plus interpretation less application is abortion. If we do not move into application, then we just aborted either the study of the Word or God's work in our lives. So, in application, what am I looking for? List some achievable and specific applications from this psalm to the following areas: your relationship with God, your family, and your ministry. Use the personal pronoun I. What will be your response? How will you respond to the psalm? So again, use I, referring to yourself. Don't look at others or a general group, but just yourself, you and God. How do you apply this word? As to interaction with secondary sources, on the assumption that you have done your exegesis, check other sources. Consult at least 3 to 5 commentaries. If the issue is textual, then check a critical or a technical commentary, but be cautious of their presuppositions and conclusions. Peruse analytical, expository, theological commentaries on other issues. Focus on the issue that you are trying to address in the psalm. Compare what you have done in your conclusions on significant issues with that of other scholars. Which of their points agree or disagree with your conclusions? What are issues in your psalm that they address? What major issues did you address which they didn't? You're thinking of, how do I know an analytical or a critical or a technical commentary? I will give you a list of the commentaries in the psalm, different commentaries in the psalm, and you can check either your library. We have a library, but right now it's difficult to secure the books there. You can check EBSCO-host as well. So for your exercise, peruse the paper of Prof. Don Glenn on an exegetical and theological exposition of Psalm 139. So I'm giving you an example for this session. If initiated, visit this link, logos.com, how to write paper or biblical text. This should be helpful in you as you, or to you as you get to your exegetical paper.